Members, family. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Happy Thursday to you. This is Dr. Selma Bartholomew from Partner with Legacy. Thank you for joining our Community Conversations with Leaders webinar. We have a dynamic panel and discussion today. So if you're just joining us, if you're new to Legacy, and this is your very first event, let me say thank you for joining us and welcome, and pull up a chair. And we're excited to have a dynamic conversation today on looking at the race to deliver. I think everyone is on pins and needles, wondering around the election results, but we're here to have a forward-thinking discussion, and we're going to talk about the race to deliver, an agenda for economics, an agenda for education, and an agenda for leadership. So if you're just joining us, thank you so much for making time to be with us today. I'm Dr. B, Dr. Selma Bartholomew, and thank you for making time again with us. So please make sure you like and subscribe. And we have a new hashtag we're doing @Partner with Legacy. And so thank you if you were able to please share it with your friends. And we're excited once again to have this conversation. So get your popcorn. I'm getting right into it with our panel. So the flow of our conversation is usually, I get a moment to ask the panel to introduce themselves, to introduce their organization. I'm excited I have Chairman Johnson from the Economic Chair for the NAACP New York chapter. I've got Dr. Carlos McCray, educator, author, professor of educational leadership, and I have the dynamic Executive Director Jasmine Guy from Alliance for Quality Education. And so they are ready to have a powerful discussion with us. So once again, thank you for joining, and thank you for joining us again and for sharing and liking the channel. So when we planned this discussion today, we knew that it would be a few days after the election, but who knew whether or not we would get a result, right? Who will be in the White House in 2021? I wanted to give a context for this discussion, talking about an agenda for economics, education, and leadership. I went back to Dr. Martin Luther King, and I'm going to do a quote from him. And he says the following. If you haven't read this book, A Call to Conscience, it's a collection of his speeches. And he says the following in his famous I Have a Dream speech, which I think gives a context for this discussion. He says, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back labeled insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. And so we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice. And so as we look forward and as we think about where we are in this great nation of ours, I think it's important for us to talk about, are we bankrupt? Are we in, what is it that we need to demand as we move forward? So I'm gonna ask our esteemed economic chair, Mr. Johnson, to first introduce himself, introduce the work of the NAACP and what you're currently engaged in. And also my first question is, tell us what you believe is an agenda item for policy around economics as we look to the future.
Well, Dr. B, first, let me thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to participate on this esteemed panel. I just want to take a few moments to really congratulate you for the work you've done over the last 10 years. In terms of the planning and organizational structure that you bring to education. And we can't wait to see what you do over the next 10 years. So thank you for your work and your efforts, and we look forward to continuing to work with you. Economic Development Chair for the New York State NAACP. I've had that position for about 10 years. Many of you know that the NAACP is probably the oldest civil rights organization in the nation, founded in 1909. We'd like to say that we're the oldest, the boldest, and the baddest. We are living in troubled times. And these times that we're living in, where organizations such as the NAACP really has to, get out there and do its work. So we're working in many different facets of the the agendas that exist. And for the last several years, we've worked on what we like to call our game changers. And so our game changers are education, free education, high quality education for all, health and health equity for our citizens, criminal justice and public safety, voting rights and voting protection, expanding youth engagement, and, you know, frankly, economic development and economic sustainment. So, you know, that was one that was added to the list a few years ago based on some of the work we were doing in New York. And it's my firm belief, and I think it's now been adopted by the national NAACP, that our economic development is a civil right. Without that as a strong foundation, we really cannot resolve many of these other issues that exist out there. And so we have been working in that arena, and I've been working to focus on leadership, MWBE creation, and things of that nature. So we welcome these partnerships, and we look forward to working with you because there's a lot of work to be done. As everyone keeps checking their television every few minutes or so, we know that there are two roads diverged in a wood, and we're going to see which road that we travel on.
That's right, and we just, as long as we choose. Thank you so much, Chairman Johnson, thank you. I'm going to now ask our Executive Director, Jasmine Guy from the Alliance for Quality Education, to introduce herself, introduce the work of her organization, and tell me what is it by way of an agenda, a policy item agenda, as we look to the future that your organization is concerned about and that we need to make a focus and a priority.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and inviting me on this panel to be here with you, as well as all these other esteemed panelists. I just want to put a plug. My grandfather was a longtime chapter leader in the NAACP in Astoria, Queens. So I am a proud product of the New York City public school system from kindergarten to CUNY. I originally started my career as a teacher, spent the most time teaching first grade. And then I got frustrated being in the classroom, that a lot of policies that were happening were coming down from people who had no experience about what it was like to be a classroom teacher. And in my frustration, I was like, I'm leaving teaching and I'm gonna do something different altogether. And it happened to be 2012, and Obama was running for re-election, and I got a job in Ohio, a battleground state, working as a field organizer for the Obama campaign. And it was my first campaign experience. But in a battleground state, I met so many great people, and I was like, what is this organizing work you all are doing? And I want to do more of it. So when I came back to New York, I found AQE, which was a combination of my education background and my organizing background, and it was a perfect match. So AQE is a statewide organization here in New York, focused on education equity, primarily the school funding fight. But it doesn't stop there. Our work has expanded to working on ending the school to prison pipeline, now working to have police-free schools, which we won in Rochester this year, and we hope to bring that victory across the state. Working to expand community schools that meet the needs of the whole child. And another big thing is culturally responsive education, right? Our public schools are full of students who are Black, brown, not white. And yet our curriculum and our teaching force is still mostly white and white centered. And so how do we have kids have a positive experience or a reflection of themselves throughout the curriculum in every subject in every hour? So not just Black History Month, not just within social studies, but at all times. And so we're committed to equity. We're committed to grassroots parent organizing and leadership development, because of course, those who are most closest to the problem are the ones with the greatest solutions. And so we've been empowering parents from Buffalo to Long Island to engage in the fight to preserve our public schools and get the resources that our kids need.
And thank you for the fight. And I love you, and thank you so much for sharing that journey. Oftentimes when we work with our educators, we want them to know that teaching is good to us and it offers a full career ladder. And so for you taking those risks and moving up in your leadership and in your influence, thank you so much. So for those who are listening, who are our educators on the line, Executive Director Gui's work is tied to the Campaign for Fiscal Equity. And so for those of us who don't know, that there was this lawsuit to sue the state for money for our children who were denied. And so we've yet to get the money. So this is part of the conversation that we're going to talk about. Our next esteemed panel member, I want to give a special thank you and love to Dr. Carlos McCray, who is a renowned author. He has a book that's coming out. I'm going to ask him to talk a little bit about it as we get into our conversation, but he has several books on school leadership. I'm honored to say that I had the pleasure of working with Dr. McCray when he was the chairman of the Department of Graduate Education and Leadership at Fordham University, and he is now at Montclair. So Dr. McCray, please introduce yourself, tell us about your work, and tell us about the agenda item as we look to the future, for leadership and for education.
Thank you, Dr. B. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you for the kind introduction. And it's also a pleasure to be on the panel with Ms. Gripper and Chairman Johnson. It's a pleasure to meet you all. As you indicated, I'm a professor at Montclair State University, and we got to know each other when I taught at Fordham, and it was just really wonderful to work with you. My research interest focuses on urban education, multicultural education, and building level leadership, meaning that I tend to focus a lot on principals and what they're doing within the school building, and specifically whether or not there's any issues surrounding equity and multicultural education. So those are some of the things I've been working on over the last few years, decade. As you indicated, I do have a book that's coming out here pretty soon. It's a second edition of School Leadership in a Diverse Society, helping schools prepare all students for success. And as Mrs. Gripper and Chairman Johnson were speaking, I was thinking about some of my own research with regard to the school to prison pipeline research. I tend to focus on suspensions and expulsions that young American males receive within the school. And so what we try to do is we deliver professional development with regard to trying to have educators understand that there's a way in which they can go about delivering instruction, structuring their classrooms to help ameliorate some of these issues that many Black and brown boys find themselves in. And also it goes back to Chairman Johnson's work with regard to the economic development, because one of the things that we indicate is in our research is that the more students are suspended and expelled from school, the greater their chances are of dropping out of school. And Chairman Johnson, and this connects with Chairman Johnson's work, when students drop out of school, they tend to be underemployed and unemployed. And that has a really great effect on who they marry, what type jobs they have, and it can destabilize the community. So what we've been trying to do over the past decade is try to get educators and school officials to curtail the number of students that are being suspended from school, and also helping educators with their classroom management, which we believe is the catalyst for a lot of these issues that we see within school. So once again, I'm very thankful to be here with you all, and I'm looking forward to a great discussion today.
Thank you, Dr. McCray. As I thought about this question, and as we were considering this question of economics, and Executive Director Gripper, you mentioned this piece about a culturally relevant curriculum, right? And the school to prison pipeline. I believe, and we believe, you cannot end the school to prison pipeline if you do not have an economic agenda, right? If you don't have an economic agenda. So for those who are listening today, I wanted to first pull some data for us, because I know that every time I turn on the news and around the whole election piece, the discussion was, are we going to vote around economics, or are we going to vote around this idea of the COVID-19 crisis and the handling of it, right? But for us, when we think about a culturally relevant curriculum, we don't want to just put Black and brown faces in the textbook. We want to have an authentic discussion around the economics and to make those connections to math. So I went and I found the following, and I'll make sure and share it. If you haven't seen it, it's FEMA's, the emergency management, right? a budget, their top 100 contractors in this country, and they're telling us that there is an economic crisis. So I'll give one or two just so you understand the context. So for example, there's a company called General Dynamics Corporation. I don't know what they did for FEMA in 2019. They made over $134 million. $134 million. T-Rex Consulting Company. Now, are they dinosaurs? They made over $232 million from the FEMA budget. And so I point to that because this is emergency management, right? This is money that our government is spending around the hurricanes, around Hurricane Katrina, around our immigration and around economic and social issues. And that money doesn't touch our community. We don't even know where it goes, but we are constantly being told in Black and brown communities that there is no money for you. There's no funding. Oh, there's a budget crisis. But yet still there are corporations who literally can say that they will continue to get a check in the hundreds of millions of dollars every single year while our children go without food, while our homeless shelters don't serve hot meals. We have children right now with barely, we finally may have gotten them some laptops. So the economic divide, to me, fuels the school to prison pipeline. And we want a real and authentic, culturally relevant curriculum. So I want to ask the question about the disconnect. I want to go to Chairman Johnson first to talk to us about the disconnect between our elected leaders and an economic agenda. What do you see is that disconnect around why is it that we're not able to get the economic base that we need in our community?
This webinar is not long enough.
You heard it here. You heard it here from Legacy.
I appreciate you starting with that. When I heard you mention General Dynamics, which is a defense contractor, for 134 million, that's small change to them.
Yes.
They normally receive billions of dollars from the United States on an annual basis. For too long, we have been consumers and we have not been equity owners of businesses.
Yes.
And that's one of the things that we in the NAACP are trying to focus on in terms of getting our folk, people of color, Black and brown, African American, Latino, and Asian, into positions where they can qualify for not only public sector contracts, whether it's from the federal, the state, or a local government, but as importantly, private sector contracts. And I have a phrase that I've used for years. I'm both, I volunteer my time in the NAACP for the last 10 years, but I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a business person. And I firmly believe that a kid can't be what a kid can't see.
Wow.
And that's resonated with me for years. I'm trained as an architect, but I would never have been an architect if no one had introduced to me what an architect does. Our kids need to know the various opportunities that are available to them through education, whether it's being a teacher, whether it's being a doctor or a lawyer, which they hear about, or whether it's being an engineer or an architect, which they might not know what that person does. They have to understand that there are technologies that are out there in solar and wind and IT and broadband that are the new wave of jobs in the future. And I just don't mean jobs being an employee. I mean being an equity owner, a creator of these businesses. And we really need to, as a people, in my opinion, create long-term strategies and goals. We cannot look at 4-year cycles as the panacea to solve our problems, because they're not.
Well said.
We've got to look at 10, 15, 20-year strategies for achieving our goals. Coming from an architectural and a real estate development background, I'll give you this quick story.
Okay.
I studied architecture at City College in the late 80s.
Okay.
And as I'd walk from the subway to City College on Convent Avenue in Harlem, the street was completely torn up.
Yes.
And it was torn up for years because they were putting in these huge pipes, these huge drainage pipes in Convent Avenue in Harlem. And nobody knew what these huge 6-foot wide pipes were for. Well, as you all know, Harlem has been extensively redeveloped over the years. Well, that development didn't start until the late 90s.
Yes.
So the infrastructure was put in place 10, 15 years before the development took place. These folks have long-range horizons. They're not thinking about 4-year cycles. They're thinking 10, 20, and 30 years down the road, and they're planning for it. And we've got to do the same with our people. We've got to prepare ourselves educationally and economically for opportunities that are going to be there that we need to create, not just in 4 years, but in 8, 10, 15, and 20. And so the foundation that we create today may not necessarily benefit us as individuals, and that's okay. We have to be good with that. We have to look at this from a perspective of what is this going to do for the next generation? Because all of us here on this webinar, listening and watching, are standing on the shoulders of others. And we're all doing okay because we're here.
Yes.
We have to recognize that we each have a responsibility for the next generation to stand on our shoulders. And that's where the foundation of economic development has to come in. And that's why we have to put ourselves in a position in the long term to be able to benefit for these opportunities.
Thank you, Chairman Johnson. So for those who are just joining us, we're listening to Race to Deliver. Thank you for pulling up a chair and staying with us. So I hear this shifting in the mindset. So for those of us who can't sleep over the next few days, Chairman Johnson has given us the impetus. Let it go. It's not about 4 years, it's about 20 years and 25 years and being stewards of what we are in the now and looking to the future. Executive Director Gripper, do you want to respond? So where do you see the disconnect between our elected officials and meeting the needs, like economic and education needs for our children and for our communities, especially children of color?
Yeah, systemic racism runs deep and wide in America and even here in New York State. And so when we think about budgets, like our state budget, our city budget, these are moral documents, and they should be balanced and they should be just. But instead, they unfairly disadvantage our communities. So too often in our communities, our kids go to schools that are underfunded. And so yes, we know technology is a new wave of jobs and we should be trained to do it. But our kids are, I literally toured schools with my organization and some principals just 2 years ago. And we visited schools in New York City where students were using Windows 95. How could I say to these students, I'm preparing you to compete in this modern world, and the technology you're using is a decade behind? And we talk about even now, right now, when many students are experiencing remote learning, that access to devices and high-speed internet, it varies by your social economic status. So if your parents have a well-paying job, if your parents are educated, you might be all right. But if your parents aren't, and they don't have the resources, you are desperately falling behind. I spoke to a parent who was told by New York City DOE they would not get a device until January. And when I brought this up to the state education department, they said, oh, that parent is lucky because we're hearing some kids won't get devices until April. And there's a complacency that that's okay. Instead, we should be rising up in frustration that our children are being denied the things that they need to succeed. The whole point of the Campaign for Fiscal Equity lawsuit that you brought up earlier, Dr. B, and if you want to know the history of it, please go to the AQE website, aqeny.org. And there's a whole detail of that lawsuit, but that lawsuit was parents over a decade ago suing the state for underfunding our schools. The parents won that lawsuit and the state has yet to fulfill its promise. And so whenever our elected officials make promises to the Black communities, whenever they make promises to deliver for us, they never do. They don't deliver for our children. They don't deliver for our communities in any way. And so we're constantly trying to play this catch-up game and we put it on individual responsibility. And it's so much bigger than that. It's a systemic oppression. It's a systemic denial of resources and tools. So too often we focus on the achievement gap, and it's not an achievement gap in itself. The achievement gap is the result of an opportunity gap. Our kids do not have the same opportunities as their wealthy white counterparts in the suburbs. And how are we closing that opportunity gap so that our kids are prepared to take on those modern jobs, so that they're prepared to be entrepreneurs? We have a system where some kids are being educated to lead and other kids are being educated to follow. And it's very unfortunate that in our communities, with the limited resources our kids have, they're being educated to be followers and not the change makers that we know that they can and should be.
Thank you. Thank you for that passionate and thoughtful reflection and honesty. You are absolutely on target in terms of that opportunity gap. And for us, this work is about, people talk about mathematics and the constant failure. For us, this is about STEAM and STREAM. There are no more jobs, people. This pandemic has not taught us, there are no more jobs. The companies, the big businesses have closed their doors, the Neiman Marcuses and the Lord and Taylors, who are suffering from moreness, right? They just want more consumption. And we have not invested in an economic agenda for our community. And I will, Dr. McCray, I'm calling on you next. I'm reflecting honestly about the fact that I am an entrepreneur and my team, we have worked tirelessly for more than 12 years. I am the only, ready for this, the only Black female entrepreneur in the New York City DOE with a contract for professional services, 178 years, and they have not made a purchase from any Black business owner or any Black vendor, and certainly not Latino as well. So I am always in the fight, and I'm still in the fight, and I will continue to be in the fight, because we have to shift to an economic agenda, and we have solutions, and we need to be able to be in a position to be able to support our children. So thank you so much for that, Executive Director Gripper. Dr. McCray, so you're in the thick of it in terms of helping leaders make sense of these challenges, right? And helping them to understand what they need to be doing to change this at the classroom level. So let us know, what do you feel is the disconnect for leaders and for policy as it relates to economics?
Well, first of all, Dr. B, I think that's an excellent question, really excellent. And I'm glad you asked me with regard to the leadership within school buildings, because as I talk about in the book that I have coming out, is that I think, and I could go back to what Ms. Gripper indicated, Chairman Johnson, with regard to the digital divide, with regard to the economic empowerment, and all of that is related, and it starts with at the schools, school principals. I call school leaders and educators essential workers, right? On the one hand, they're essential workers because they're helping get the economy back going. That students are going back to school. It allows parents to go back to work. So in that particular instance, they're kind of essential workers, but they're also essential workers in another dynamic as well. They're essential workers because they have, whether they know it or not, they have a crucial role in helping to solve some of these issues that we're talking about today. And it's not going to happen overnight. That's why I like when Chairman Johnson talked about, no, it's not about the next 2 or 3 years, 4 years, it's about the next 10 years. And that brings me to the point of visionary leadership, right? So, I think school leaders, school leaders have to ask themselves, what type of society or community do we want our students to live in over the next 10 to 15 years? And I don't think we do a good job with that. I think we do a good job with goals and objectives, et cetera, et cetera. But when Ms. Gripper talks about the notion of the digital divide, right, where some students don't have access to the internet, or adequate internet or broadband, and it's impeding on them to be able to do their lesson. Visionary leadership calls for the school leader to say, well, let's look around. Let's do some scoping within the community, and let's see what is it that we need to fix. We may not be able to fix it over the next 3 or 4 years, but we can fix it over the next 10 years. And like I said, I just don't think we do a good job with that. And I think that, it's going, the health disparities with regard to within the Black and brown communities, how do we fix the health disparities? Do school leaders and educators have a role in that? They may say that they don't, but I would argue the different. I would beg the differ. I would say that they do have some challenges there. So I think that if we're going to be successful with some of the things that you're talking about, it's going to start at the school level, and school leaders are going to have to engage in looking beyond just 3 or 4 years and looking 10 years down the road and seeing what can they help fix within their communities.
I'm honored because
if I may, Dr. B?
Can you hear me?
Yes. If I just may interject
Go
really
ahead,
quickly.
Kevin Johnson, that's right, go ahead.
I just want to, I want to say a couple things. You know, we have not done a good job of holding the governor's feet to the fire for the funds that were promised the campaign for fiscal equity.
Absolutely.
And I think that clearly that has to change.
Mhm.
What we're going to hear is that there ain't no money.
That's what
right?
we're hearing now. That's what everybody's hearing.
Right. But we know money exists because magically develops. We have to be more engaged, and we have to be maybe more creative in the means and methodologies that we use to impact change politically, whether it's social media, whether it's press and publicity directly. We just have to get, we have to implement all the tools that are available to us to ensure we get our just due. Because we are entering an era of fiscal austerity, quote unquote. And it always impacts communities of color more than it impacts everybody else.
Yes.
And the fact of the matter is, in New York State, as well as throughout the nation, but let's just talk about New York. In New York State, we are heading in a direction where at some point in time, this will be a majority minority state. Much like you, I'm an entrepreneur. And so while I have the only Black-owned maritime tourism business, probably in the country, but definitely in the tri-state area. But we have to ensure that people of color who are entrepreneurs, as well as our educational system, get the resources we need to remain on the footing we need to be on, because the challenge is real and it's going to become exacerbated no matter who ends up in DC. All right. So we really need to, we can't just relax now that the election is over, irrespective of who wins. We actually have to gear up. We're entering a season of perpetual activism. At least we need to ensure that both on the state and the county and the town or city level, that we get our just due. And we've got to be more politically astute. We've got to be more politically challenging, and we have to be more cohesive in our messaging.
Thank you.
I just wanted to throw that out there.
No,
Can I respond to that?
Go ahead, jump in.
Yes, I want to say AQE has been constantly hammering at Governor Cuomo and his policies and denying our kids their right to an education and underfunding our schools. But you're absolutely right in that we are going into what they're going to say austerity budgets, right? That there's this huge budget deficit and we have to close this budget gap somehow. And I just want to remind people, the last time we were in a budget deficit and we were in a recession, what Governor Cuomo actually did, he was in office, and his first year of office, he cut over $1 billion from education, and at the same time gave a tax break to New York's millionaires.
Exactly.
And so that is a choice. And so what we want to say or remind everyone is that, one, we live in the wealthiest country in the world.
That's right.
We live in one of the wealthiest states. And New York City itself has a whole bunch of wealth all by itself. And so how do we say we're broke when it comes to the education of Black, brown, and low-income children, yet we have so much wealth around us? Again, its budgets are about choices. Will we tax the ultra wealthy? Will we tax the millionaires and billionaires? Or will we balance the budget again on the backs of our children and the working poor? And I think as we go into this next legislative cycle in January, we have to pay close attention to what Governor Cuomo wants to do, because in the midst or at the height of the pandemic in New York City, what Governor Cuomo proposed to do was to cut 20% from everybody. He was going to cut 20% from education, from hospitals in the middle of a pandemic. And he refused. And the reporter said, will you tax the ultra wealthy? he became a fierce advocate. He said, I will not. I can't tax the wealthy. They already do enough. And I said, I wish he would advocate for our children the way he advocates for billionaires. His own response to the press conference was, I call the rich in the Hamptons and Western New York every day. And I'm like, well, can you call parents and teachers and hear what our plights are? He refuses. And it is up to us. And we are already building a massive statewide multi-issue revenue coalition campaign. We have already identified right now 14 ways to tax the ultra rich. There's a website called makebillionaireспay.info of 14 proposals that only go after the ultra rich. So not everyday New Yorkers, not the working poor, but the ultra wealthy who gain their wealth by stealing from our communities, right? Like, how do they gain their wealth? They extract it from us. And so we need them to pay what they owe back into our community so that we can balance our budget, invest in education, invest in healthcare, and all the things we need strategically. And so, yes, we need everyone to pay attention. The national results are going to be important. Will we get a bailout from Washington or not? But no matter what, New York State is looking at a $14, $16 billion deficit that the state has to balance. And will they balance it on the backs of our children or on the backs of the ultra rich?
And they have continued to balance. Thank you so much. They continue to balance it on the backs of our children. And that's why Dr. B pointed us to that FEMA top 100 contractors. In the context, Dr. McCray, I love that question. You said, and for those who are listening in the audience, please make sure you like and subscribe. And the call to action, the question I'm going to put out is, what type of solutions do we want in the next 10 years? I think it's an okie doke. I think that when we're listening to the news and they keep telling us, I'm not saying that there are not budget issues, but we have to shift our mindset to contracts, right? Black and Latino businesses in New York State make less than 2%. And in New York City, for example, in New York City DOE, we make less than 0.2%. Black and Latino contractors. I want to push it to a national conversation because we need to tax Mickey Mouse as well. We need to understand that, right, that we need to be able to use those dollars to build infrastructure and to build businesses. And I feel like if, Chairman Johnson, when you're telling us to look ahead and to come up with a 10-year and a 20-year plan, we need to say right now that we need to be able to have some conversations about what are the STEAM and the STREAM jobs that we need to be building that infrastructure out in our community. And so we need in the Bronx one of those $100 million contracts that's been going to those same FEMA people. We have capacity within our community. And so we need to be able to shift that. We are not poor. We have the human resources. We have the capacity. We've just been denied the opportunity. So for us, I want us to think also nationally that this conversation it's not just only about New York. And I have to also say, I don't think it's only about a Black and a brown issue in the sense that we see a lot of the divide, right? But we can be united on an economic agenda. We have worked in places like Bismarck, North Dakota. And I tell people that my vision in the next 10 years, I want to put a plane in the Bronx, just as how we put a plane in North Dakota. So in Bismarck, the kids from early elementary to middle school, to high school, they have an aviation program where they're teaching their kids everything about aviation and using that as a lens to motivate and to explore careers. Why can't we get that in the Bronx? So we have to begin to, or in Brooklyn or in New York City, we have to begin to give our politicians an agenda of far more vision and much more about opportunity. We keep talking about like we're poor. We're not poor as a nation. You're absolutely right. Dr. McCray, I see you wanted to jump in there. Go ahead, jump in.
No, Dr. B, I was just thinking as you were talking about this vision, one of the reasons why I think that we fail with regard to creating cogent visions, whether it's within our schools or even at the state level or what have you, is because, oftentimes when we create a vision, visions, one of my favorite authors would always talk about everything can be measured, right? We can measure everything. So when we create a vision, when we talk about a vision, as Chairman Johnson indicated, 10 or 15 years from now, we have to be able to measure that, right? It just can't be something that we say that we create and we don't go back to it to check whether or not we made any progress towards it. And so I think that's the problem, especially with the relates to school administrators with regard to creating a vision, not only for their schools, but for their communities is, oh my God, I'm scared that I may fail. If we fail, we fail, but at least we're creating something and we're checking to see whether or not we're successful. And I think that a lot of times we're apprehensive because, no one likes to fail, right? We like to do things, or goals and objectives are easy. We can clearly measure those within a year or two. But when you talk about doing away with healthcare disparities, when you talk about restructuring, funding and things of that nature, and doing away with decreasing the school to prison pipeline and all of that, those things it takes hard work for that. And I just wanted to jump in and say that even though it takes hard work, we shouldn't be afraid to try. And I think that's a major issue with leaders, with not only within schools, but just in society in general. So
thank you so much for those. This is Dr. B from Partner with Legacy. This is our Race to Deliver conversation and agenda for economics, education, and leadership. Please make sure you like and subscribe. You can also send us questions in the chat. We're going to open it up in a few minutes to be able to get your questions. So please send us the questions in the chat, and I have access to be able to get those. I want to touch the question of fear. And as we think about why are we not doing this, right? And I think that what we're seeing nationally is that people are now discovering their voice and recognizing that their voice gives them power. And for my school leaders and for those that we work with, I feel like if we're at a cusp where they are discovering their voice and that they have to now take the risk to be honest about what's really happening within their school building, right? Because you wear the golden handcuffs sometimes, and you feel like if you just have to, make everything okay, you've got this building and all of these needs that you're trying to triage all of the time. And so they keep focusing you inside on that space where you need to be, yes, you need to be able to meet the needs of your children, but if you're constantly triaging, you need to step a minute and take a breath and first see that you're not alone, and to begin to connect with other educational leaders, connect with other organizations who have your interests, who's able to support you. And then you can collectively have a voice. You can collectively say, as administrators, right, who care, Black administrators, have principals who are white administrators, but as school leaders who care and who recognize that our children are not getting the opportunity and the access to the resources that we need, that we're going to put out a statement. We're going to put out what we need. So I'm hopeful that in this space around voice and the civil unrest, that our leaders begin to trust their voice and to begin to now share their voice with others, and to connect on a much more broader scale. Because I think we need that if we're going to truly move forward, because there's not that, like, you have to be honest, right? Literally, like, stop lying. Stop lying. Our kids don't have laptops. Stop lying. We've got kids in group homes who don't have a hot meal. Stop lying. So until we can begin to be courageous in that space. I have one question before we go to questions and answers. Go ahead, Chairman.
One question real quick.
Go ahead.
Just to Chairman Johnson and Ms. Gripper, these are, when we talk about, building bridges with the community, schools building bridges with the community. I mean, school administrators need to reach out to individuals like Chairman Gripper, Miss Gripper, Chairman Johnson and Ms. Gripper, and bring them into their schools.
Yes.
These are the individuals that we need in our schools, connecting, mentoring, interacting with our students, and forming partnerships. So I just wanted to say that, and you said something that really made me think of that, but this whole notion of building bridges with the community, I think that's another piece that we failed at, that we need to do better at.
I'd like to piggyback on that really quickly. I'd like to piggyback. Dr. McCray, I think you're so on point with that comment. We've got to build these bridges. We have just experienced what I like to call a summer of discontent, right? And this pandemic is an inflection point. In many respects, what takes place from this point moving forward in the future, we cannot do business after this pandemic the way we did business before this pandemic, right? 9/11 was another inflection point. You all remember it.
Yes.
Travel has never been the same since. Complete agencies have been created, DHS, Homeland Security. You can't go into the cockpit of an airplane. Airplane doors are armored. There's a whole suite of things. You know, as a kid, I used to be able to go on the roof of an airport and wave goodbye or walk up to the gate and see somebody else. It's all changed. This pandemic is like that, but on steroids.
Yes.
And I say that to say, for better or for worse, many people, as well as the corporations that they run and they work in, have now developed a conscience, or at least a recognition of the inequities that have affected people of color, at least so they claim. We can't just look at government anymore as a singular resource, in my opinion. We need to harness the energy that's come out of this summer of discontent. We need to harness this recognition from various corporations and institutions, and we need to partner with them, right? We need to reach out to them as well to help our educational system. We talk about schools that need computers. Well, there's Dell and there's HP and there's Lenovo. We talk about Windows 95. Well, let's go to Microsoft. They're all articulating that they recognize what our communities need, at least so they claim. Whether we believe them or not, let's put their feet to the fire. Let's say this community needs X, you've got it. How can you help this community with the resources that it needs so it can do what it needs to do, right?
I'm going to actually
harness this energy.
I'm going to push back on that, Chairman Johnson. I'm going to say we have needs, and it's time that we now begin to look at a coalition of businesses, Black and Latinx businesses, who can provide computers, right? Yes, so Dell, when in New York City, the mayor, he put up his list of the people who got contracts in New York City DOE. There are no Black businesses on that list, okay? So yes, Dell is gonna make their money off of Black kids, and all of those other companies are gonna make their money, but they do not have to walk the streets of the Bronx or Brooklyn or any of those places where our kids are, the gang issues. So I'm not saying we don't want them as partners, but I think it's time that we start asking about the economics. Where is it that we're going to sustain an economic agenda?
And I completely agree with you on that. I completely agree with you. But there are certain things that we need, and we need today, right? And we know who produces them today, right? Yeah. That still means that there are businesses that we can engage in, such as yours, to be as consultants or implementers or IT servicing or whatever it is. There's a whole range of things. The Board of Education has a $5 billion annual budget, and we get, as you indicated, 0.2% of it. So there's a lot of room for improvement, and we have to hold everyone's feet to the fire. I'm on these MBE leadership discussions every 2 weeks on these issues, and so I completely agree with you. Yes. But what I am saying is we cannot let this opportunity go by where we let these major corporations who all of a sudden are developing a conscience slip by.
Well said.
This is never going to happen again.
Go ahead, Jen. Go ahead.
I agree, but I respectfully disagree a little bit. I think, some of these corporations claim they have a conscience, but going from a tweet to action are two completely different things, right? And so Jeff Bezos saying, paying $0 in federal taxes is absolutely ridiculous when you're one of the wealthiest or the wealthiest person in the world and have one of the most profitable companies. But yet he might say, I think recently he's like, I'm going to start a school. And I was like, I don't want Jeff Bezos to start a school. I want Jeff Bezos to pay his taxes, right? Like what he can do more by just being a fair player in the economy with everyone else than he could by leveraging his wealth in a really a way that he's overly controlling something that he actually doesn't know anything about. He's not an expert in education. He's not an expert on schools. And so we have to be really careful about giving private industries too much control, especially over a system like education where they are not the experts. But I do think like community schools, for example, is built on the notion of partnerships with the school and the community. But that means the community. Who is in our community? What banks are in our community that can partner with the school? What businesses are in our community that can partner with the school and service the needs of the whole child, right? And that is a plethora of needs. And community schools look different based on the neighborhood and based on what the families that go to that school or who are served at that school need. And I think it's a great model for bringing those partnerships together in the school as a building, right? The school is just a hub for all of these partnerships to live. And there's a great community schools models, and they're happening all across the state. We could be doing more, we could be doing better, but I do believe it's a model, but I do want to caution against like overly giving to the private industry too much control, and when we should be holding them accountable for the basics. Y'all should be paying your taxes, right? Like, because when you do that, there's more funding for our schools. And then we hold their feet to the fire for that, and then we leverage it for other things. And so too often we let them get by with these small initiatives where they can pat themselves on the back, right? I have a big check I'm going to come to this Black community and hand out, and it's nothing compared to what they should be paying if they were a fair play in our tax system, right?
And we can chew gum. We can chew gum and walk at the same time.
I agree.
I
Yes.
completely agree with you, because even when Jeff Bezos writes that check like he should, it's going to take X amount of time for that check to get dispersed and get to where it needs to go. So we need to start that process so we can get that tax base back. But at the same time, we can have them implement and share the resources they have that we need today. So we can absolutely do both. I completely agree.
And just let me
Go ahead, Dr. McCray.
Yeah, I just want to add this one comment, and I really like the comments, really love the comments. And I think that one of the things that I'm concerned about is I think that we may have school administrators who may want to do this type of work, right? Are you guys still with me?
Yes.
Yeah, so they want to do this type of work, but they don't necessarily know how with regard to reaching out and bringing these resources in. And I totally agree with the comment with regard to we can walk and chew gum at the same time. I agree with you, Ms. Gripper. Companies need to pay their fair share, but we need to form partnerships. And if we don't have students, we have students without computers, et cetera, we need to get them in, and we need to form partnerships with them. But one of the things, and Chairman Johnson, I really like this, one of the things that really worries me is that maybe we need to train administrators with regard to how to reach out, especially in schools that may not have the requisite or necessary resources, how to reach out to these businesses and get what they need in there, and not necessarily wait on the state or the city or whoever to bring to provide the resources. So I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, I fully agree. And it's a challenge. And I think we have to be very thoughtful about mindset, which is why we're having this discussion. Why are you doing this, right? What are you seeking to achieve? Because you might go into the partnership or into the relationship with one goal, and the other person, as Executive Director Gripper is saying, might have another mindset. And for us, the mindset that I'm seeking to end around philanthropy, around education, is I'm seeking to end the project mindset, where they come in and they give you a project and they keep you in the mindset of people who rely on just enough cash to survive. And they make you think that there's no money and there's no resources. But again, I'm going to point people to the federal dollar. And as we go into the next few months and into the next package, they're going to be talking about trillions of dollars. So I plan on doing a post on how much is $1 billion anyway? What should we be asking for? So it's important when we talk about math to know what those numbers are, and to realize that we need to be able to work collaboratively to get those goals. So I hear a theme of partnership and collaboration. For those who are here, please make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. And I want to let me just summarize a couple of talking points before I do the last question. So I heard this question around keeping the fire to Governor Cuomo and to all of our elected officials, and us getting onto AQE's site. And I know I've been there. There is this charge around what do we need to demand. Don't get comfortable around the fact that we just had an election. That means you think you went out and vote and somebody's listening to you, but no, they are going to push those agendas. I also heard Chairman Johnson says a kid can't be what a kid can't see. So if you're working in the education space, it's time to now give our children the opportunities for them to now see themselves as entrepreneurs, see themselves as architects, see the teaching career and the profession and their opportunities to move through the career that we have. And I also hear that this idea that we want the money. So the taxes, where is the money from the taxes? And how do we begin to set an agenda that's not 4 years, but 10 years and 15 years down the line? And so, and for us as a company, I'm always talking about STEM and STREAM. We want it at the center and the focus, because there are no more jobs, there's no more factory jobs, but I want to be the one, like I said, we want to be able to put the wind turbines, we want to be able to talk about solar energy in our communities, and those are the jobs that we want to train our children to, and we can't do it if we can't fix math education in STEM. So for those in the audience, please make sure you like and subscribe. And so I want to be able to ask our panelists one final question, and I will then also share some upcoming legacy events. So final question: to do this work, to be able to be, as we move forward, takes courage. And so I'm going to say to you the following opening, and you tell us how to complete it. Success takes the courage to blank, to be successful in this endeavor that we've talked about. Success takes the courage to blank. I'm going to start with Chairman Johnson, and then I'll go to Dr. McCray, and then Executive Director Gripper. So,
Success takes the courage to disagree with the general perception that you may have in your group or organization. You have to be willing to go counter, to go upstream if you have to. Many times we go along to get along. We don't want to create that ripple, right? You don't want the focus on you. And if you have a really good idea, be passionate about it, you know? Prove your point, find your case studies, and present your case. Sometimes we're too timid as a people. And I think that we've got to be as assertive as possible and as confident as possible and back it up, right? So if you have a strong position, don't just have an idea. Show others where that idea stems from, show them the case studies, and explain why you think that this idea can be successful. You know, that's what I've always embraced. And, you know, it will cause ruffles and it might cause some problems, but hey, life is short. If you don't challenge the norms, you know, if we don't challenge norms, we're not going to get anywhere, right? Someone real quick, someone once said that the earth was round. He looked like an idiot at the time,
yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
Someone said that they could fly and someone laughed at them and said, you're an idiot.
Yes.
So, you know, challenge it, go for it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chairman Johnson. Thank you for lending your voice and pushing us forward with a visionary agenda. Dr. McCray, success takes the courage to.
Wow. First of all, let me just say that's a very hard one to follow, because I totally agree. But I'm going to stay in that direction, but I would say success takes the courage to fail. I just think that we live in a time in which people are afraid to fail. And I think that's how we learn. That's how we get better. You know, I think about Michael Jordan. And I think about when he was cut from his basketball team in high school. And he used that to motivate him to become, some may argue now that LeBron has his 4th ring, but the greatest basketball player ever, you know? So I've benefited. I've learned personally from failures.
Yes.
And it made me better. And I think that, you know, whether we're talking about action research, whether we're talking about setting goals or objectives or setting a vision, we have to know that there may be a possibility we fail, but that doesn't make us failures. If we learn from it and move on. And so that's how I would answer that question.
Thank you, Dr. McCray, and thank you again for your voice and for pushing us to a visionary view of what we need to do as educators. Executive Director Gripper, success takes the courage to.
I would say those were both really great answers, and this is just a variation of that. Success takes the courage to speak truth to power and hold those in power accountable, even when they look like you. And I say that under the context that the New York State budget for a long time was negotiated by 3 white men in a room. And then that was changed, and we got a Black man from the Bronx negotiating the New York State budget. And now we have, Andrew Cuomo, Carl Hastie from the Bronx, and we have a Black woman, Andrea Stewart Cousins from Westchester, a former teacher who grew up in the projects, negotiating the state budget. But yet and still, New York State ranks 49th in the nation when it comes to education equity. That should not be the case. And so when we have people in power at all levels, we have to hold them accountable, even when those people look like us, even when they come from the communities, our communities that have been most impacted by these problems. It is our responsibility to hold their feet to the fire, hold them accountable every step of the way, and demand justice for our children.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Executive Director Gripper, and you can find her at Alliance for Quality Education. On behalf of my legacy team, I'm going to say that success takes the courage to build relationships and to build your team. It's not easy to take those risks, to be vulnerable, to ask for help, and to trust others, and to begin to give that exchange that needs to happen if we're going to move forward, not only as a community of color, but as a nation. We're going to have to do some real work around building positive relationships and getting to know each other and see where those common causes are so that we can move our country forward. On behalf of the entire Partner with Legacy team, I want to say a special thank you to each member of our panel. I've learned so much from you, and it's been a fantastic and awesome conversation. For those who are listening, thank you so much for joining us for our community conversations with leaders. I want to invite you back on first on November 12th. We are launching a special series called Legacy Ed News. I'm honored to say that Dr. Lester Young, New York State Regent, will help us kick that off. And the goal is we plan on covering the most trending news in education within 10 minutes. So that's going to be Thursday mornings, 8:50 every morning on a Thursday, to be able to connect with us on Legacy Ed News. Our next webinar is also on November 19th. And interesting, Dr. McCray, you talked about building bridges. So that webinar is going to be on transforming the corrections and juvenile justice system and building bridges back to family and back to community. And so that's going to be a powerful webinar, because we often don't know that those of us who are in the juvenile justice and who's in that prison system, when you burnt a bridge from family, it's hard to go back to community. It's hard to figure out. And so we need to be able to have an honest conversation about the work that's happening in corrections and juvenile justice. Once again, we thank you. Thank you for using the hashtag @PartnerWithLegacy, @PartnerWithLegacy. A special shout out to Melissa St. John. We have a new LinkedIn page. We have a new Facebook page. And so we're kind of just moving and hoping that we are bringing you good content and content to get you inspired. And finally, in November, on November 15th, we are a special season 2 premiere of the Dr. Selma B Show. And the topic will be confidence, with a special tribute to grandparents around the world. And to my team, to the entire Legacy team, I tell everyone, you may find someone as good, but you will never find anyone better than the members of our team. And so they know that I love them, and I so appreciate their constant love and support, which gives me the energy to continue as an entrepreneur in this space. So once again, thank you to our dynamic panel. Thank you to those who are listening. And I look forward to you engaging with us. I've got a couple of questions. He says, a kid can't be what a kid can't see. What type of society do we want in the next 10 years? And what are we going to do to make sure we keep the fire under Governor Cuomo to ensure that our children get access and equity and opportunity? Thank you again, everyone. Thank you for staying with us, and have a really wonderful day. And please continue to be safe.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. B. It's nice to meet everyone.